The morning Lady Matilda Patterson decided to destroy her future, the snow was not falling softly. It was driving sideways across the village square of Bra in sharp, bitter sheets, the kind that found every gap in a coat and every crack in a person's composure. The cobblestones were glazed white, the market sellers were pulling their awnings down, and in the middle of all of it, standing beside a stone trough at the far edge of the square, was a man named Ethan Campbell, though no one in Bra knew him by that name. They knew him as Thomas. Thomas the quiet one. Thomas who did odd work and slept where he could and never caused trouble. Thomas who wore a coat that had seen better seasons and kept his eyes down when the quality folk passed through. Matilda did not keep her eyes down. She crossed the square with purpose, wore her forest green cloak darkening at the hem from the slush, her dark hair braided close against her head, her gloved hand pressed to a rolled sheet of paper tucked tight under her arm. Every step she took was deliberate. She was not wandering. She was not lost. She was executing a plan that she had spent the better part of 3 sleepless nights constructing, and she was not going to let the weather stop her. Behind her, a hired carriage had just pulled into the far end of the lane. She did not look back. The man by the trough watched her come. He had good eyes, careful, steady, the kind that registered everything without appearing to. And in the few seconds it took Matilda to close the distance between them, he had already assessed her coat, her posture, the rolled paper, the particular set of her jaw, and arrived at a conclusion that made him go very still. She stopped in front of him. She held out the paper. She said, "I need a husband. Today. I am told you are unmarried. I am offering you a legal arrangement, and I would ask you to read this before you refuse." The man looked at the paper. He looked at her, and somewhere behind them both, a carriage door opened, and a voice Matilda had been hearing all her life, sharp, clipped, with that particular edge that came from years of managing fear disguised as authority, cut across the square like a cold blade. "Matilda, Matilda Patterson, do not take another step." Matilda did not move. Neither did the man. And then something happened that nobody in Bra would forget for a long time. He took the paper. "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to us. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, and comments. So if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. All right, thank you. Now let's get back to the story. Thornwick Manor had not always smelled of damp plaster and anxiety. There had been a time, not so long ago, within living memory, certainly within Matilda's, when the manor house carried itself with the quiet confidence of a family that belonged to its landscape. The fires were generous. The table was full. On winter evenings the lamps were lit in every room, and their warm light fell through the tall windows and made the stone facade look almost golden from the drive. All of that ended the morning Lord Alistair Patterson was carried to his bed with a fever the family physician called entirely manageable. He was dead in 4 days. That was 18 months before the morning Matilda stood in the Bra Square. 18 months of watching Thornwick contract around her family like a fist slowly closing. First the horses went, except one. Then the eastern wing was shut off and the furniture sheeted. The cook left when her wages ran 6 weeks late and was replaced by a girl from the village who could manage soup and bread, but not much else. By the following autumn, 3 of the 5 remaining staff were working on promises rather than pay. Hannah Patterson managed all of this with the particular ferocity of a woman who refuses to let anyone see her fall apart. She was 51 years old, sharp-featured, with the upright carriage of someone who had been told from girlhood that posture was the first line of dignity. Her lilac silk, the good dress, the one she had been wearing and repairing and pressing into duty for 3 years now, showed its age at the seams if you looked closely. But Hannah did not encourage close looking. She managed, she wrote letters, she renegotiated. She smiled at solicitors and charmed creditors, and kept the front of Thornwick presentable on the theory that the world treats a collapsing thing with more contempt than it deserves, and she was not going to give the world that satisfaction. But by January of 1842, she had run out of moves, all except one. She told Matilda on a Tuesday morning, her voice carefully composed, her hands folded in her lap. "Brian Dixon is coming on Friday. I want you to receive him properly." Matilda was standing at the window of the upper sitting room. The frost on the hedges below had not yet melted. It was 8:30 in the morning, and already the cold had found its way through the sash frame and into the room itself. She did not turn around. "Brian Dixon has been here twice already, and he is willing to come a third time. That says something about his character." Matilda thought it said something about his character too, but not the something her mother meant. "He has 2 dead wives, Mother." "He has 2 deceased wives," Hannah said, with the precision of a woman who believes strongly in the power of word choice. "Both of illness, are both attended by physicians whose records are clear. There is no scandal. There is only misfortune." Matilda turned from the window then. She looked at her mother, at the careful composure, the pressed lilac, the folded hands, and felt a grief that had nothing to do with Alistair Patterson's death and everything to do with what his death had made Hannah into. "I will receive him on Friday," Matilda said. It was not agreement. It was the beginning of a plan. Brian Dixon arrived precisely on time, which Matilda noted because unpunctuality was one of the very few freedoms available to men of his station, and he had declined to take it. He was a man who liked his margins, she decided. He liked the edges of things neat. He was 43, broad through the chest, thick at the jaw, with fair hair combed very flat, and a suit that fitted him so well it had clearly been made for no other body. He moved through the front hall of Thornwick Manor with the comfortable ease of a man who has been inside a great many houses and assessed them all. His eyes were light grey and took everything in without appearing to. Hannah greeted him with the best of herself, warm and gracious, the old manner surfacing like muscle memory. She had found the good china. There was actual cream for the tea. Matilda sat across from Brian Dixon in the sitting room and understood, within the first 5 minutes, exactly what kind of man he was. He spoke about his estate in Perthshire, the way people speak about things they have already decided belong to them. He referred to his previous marriages with a practiced sadness that sat on his face correctly, but never reached the light grey eyes. He asked Matilda twice what she thought of his opinions, and listened to neither answer, his attention moving, she noticed, to the room itself each time. The faded curtains, the missing piano, the gaps where furniture had been. He was pricing the deficit, calculating what she was worth once you subtracted what she owed. "Miss Patterson," he said, near the end of the visit, turning to her with a smile she had been watching him practice on her mother all afternoon. "Your mother tells me you are a sensible young woman." "I try to be," Matilda said. "Sensible women make excellent wives," he said. "They understand the value of stability, of structure, of knowing one's place within a household. Knowing one's place." She pressed those words flat inside herself, kept her face still, and said nothing at all. After he left, Hannah stood in the hallway with both hands pressed together and relief written across every feature. "He likes you," Hannah said. Matilda thought about the women who had sat where she sat, who had received the same careful assessment, the same measured smile. She thought about the fact that in Scotland, in 1842, a married woman owned nothing in her own name. Not her clothing, not her wages, if she earned any. Not the children she might bear. Not even the legal right to leave without her husband's permission. Once the register was signed, she became, in the most literal sense the law allowed, his property, his responsibility, his to manage as he saw fit. "I am going to visit Agnes in Inverary for a few days," Matilda said. She had no cousin Agnes in Inverary. She had the beginning of a plan and the sense to know that honesty, here, would only produce a locked door. Hannah looked at her daughter for a moment with the searching expression of a mother who knows something is wrong, but cannot locate it precisely. "Of course," she said finally. "Don't be long." Matilda went upstairs and started writing. The contract took 2 evenings to write properly. Matilda sat at her writing desk with the lamp burning low, drafting and redrafting with the methodical care of someone who understands that a document is only as useful as its precision. She had read enough legal correspondence, from her father's solicitors, from the creditors, and from the entail trustees, to know how language could be bent to mean almost anything. She was writing this one to mean exactly what it said. 2 parties entering a legal marriage of mutual convenience. The marriage to be valid under Scottish law. Scotland's laws on marriage were notably more flexible than England's in this period, requiring only mutual consent and witnesses before a minister to be binding. No property to transfer in either direction. No conjugal expectation unless entered into separately and willingly by both parties at a later time of their choosing. A sum of money to the man. She named the figure, small but honest, and a guaranteed legal status of married woman to herself. Duration, no less than 1 year, after which either party could pursue legal dissolution by mutual agreement. No, she read it back 3 times and changed 1 clause. Then she folded it, placed it inside her coat, and began her packing. She chose Bra for 3 reasons. It was 12 miles from Thornwick, which put it outside the immediate reach of Hannah's network of connections. It was a working village rather than a genteel one, which meant that the social architecture of status that governed manor life, who owed what to whom, who could be pressured into what, held less weight there. And James Black, the minister at St. Columba's, had a reputation for being a man of conscience rather than convenience. She had heard his name mentioned once, in passing, by the cook before the cook left, in the context of someone who had helped a difficult situation become a manageable one. She was counting on that. She left before dawn on a Thursday, what with a bag of practical things and her grandmother's ring already sold and converted into coin. The note she left her mother said she needed air. It said not to worry. It did not say when she would return, because she was not planning to return to the version of Thornwick that was waiting for her. The road to Bra was quiet and winter grey, and for the 2 miles she walked before finding a carter willing to take her as far as the junction. She thought not about fear, but about forward motion. She had made the decision. The decision was made. All that remained now was to find the right person to complete it with. She arrived in Bra as the market was setting up, and she walked the square slowly, watching. Then she saw him. He was not begging. That was the first thing Matilda noticed, and it was important, because it altered what she thought she was looking for. She had imagined someone visibly desperate, hat in hand, eyes downward, the whole performance of poverty that she had been taught in her drawing-room education was the distinguishing mark of the very poor. This man had none of that. He was standing at the far edge of the square near the horse trough, with his hands loose at his sides, watching the market take shape with the quiet attention of someone who has time and is in no particular hurry to use it. His coat was heavy charcoal wool, worn but not ragged, with a tartan scarf wound twice at the collar. His boots were good quality that had walked a long distance. His posture, and this was the thing Matilda kept returning to, was straight. Not the military straightness of performance, but the structural straightness of a person who was simply built that way, whose body had not yet learned how to collapse, even when circumstances gave it every reason. He had dark hair, close kept, and a face that the weather had worked on, not unkindly, but honestly. There was a scar along his left cheek, faint and old, healed entirely into the geography of his face. His eyes, when they moved briefly across the square and touched on Matilda before moving on, were a settled brown, alert, measuring, but without aggression. She asked the cheese seller his name, Thomas Campbell, 2 months in Bra. Quiet man, no trouble. Did odd work when it was offered. Nobody knew where he had come from. Is he married? Matilda asked. The cheese seller looked at her as though this question belonged to a different conversation entirely. Not as I know of. Matilda thanked her and crossed the square. He watched her come the way he watched everything, steadily, without urgency, making his assessment before she arrived, rather than scrambling to make it after. He did not straighten when she approached. He did not smile. He simply waited, his breath making small clouds in the cold morning air, his hands still loose at his sides. Close up, she noticed the ring. On his right hand, half covered by the coat sleeve, a gold ring, not ornamental, pressed with a crest she could not quite see from the angle she was standing. It was entirely wrong for everything else about him. She stored the observation and did not act on it. Not yet. Thomas Campbell, she said. My name is Matilda Patterson. I need to discuss an unusual proposal with you, and I am asking you to hear me out completely before you say anything. He looked at her for one beat. Then, all right. His voice was low and even, with a highland lift that had been partially smoothed down, as if by deliberate effort or long absence. She could not place the origin of it precisely. She noticed she was paying more attention to his voice than she had expected to. She told him everything. Standing there in the January cold, with the market noise around them and the snow beginning to spit again from a sky that had turned the color of old pewter, she laid out the whole of it. The debt, the manor, her father's death, Brian Dixon, the marriage market, the legal trap that waited for her if she stepped into it, and the plan she had constructed to keep herself out of it. She spoke clearly and without drama, and did not ask for sympathy. She presented it as a problem she had already half solved, and needed his cooperation to complete. When she finished, the square moved around them, a dog barking, a cart scraping over wet cobblestone, the cheese seller's voice carrying, and Thomas Campbell looked at her with an expression she could not fully read. Then he said, "You have not thought about what comes after." They sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the square to read the contract, and the cold came up through the stone into both of them, and neither of them moved. He read it with the same careful, unhurried attention he seemed to give everything. Twice through, then a third pass on the clause about conjugal obligation, which he read without changing his expression. When he reached the sum of money on the last page, he was quiet for a moment. "This is everything you have," he said. "It is what I have available. It will last you 4 months in a place like this, if you are careful. After that, After that, I will have found a means of supporting myself, she said. Women do manage it. The ones who are willing to work. He looked at her. His expression was not dismissive. She noticed that. It was the expression of someone weighing a claim against available evidence, which was a more respectful thing than most men offered her when she spoke. You have never been cold enough to be desperate, he said. Not cruelly. Simply as a fact he was placing on the table between them. No, she said. But I know what it is to be trapped, and I know which one I'd rather learn to survive. He looked down at his right hand, that small movement again, checking something, or perhaps steeling himself against something. Then he set the contract on his knee and turned to face her more directly. I'm going to tell you something that I would ask you to keep between us for now, he said. She waited. I am not what I appear to be. I can't say more than that yet. What I can tell you is that there is a risk attached to me that has nothing to do with poverty and everything to do with my past. If that past finds me, it will find you too. Anyone standing near me when it arrives will be caught in it. She looked at him for a long moment. A man with a past he couldn't explain, a gold ring that didn't fit his circumstances, and a way of carrying himself that was wrong for a man with nothing. She had noticed all of it. She had not missed any of it. Brian Dixon, she said, has buried 2 wives. Not from illness. From something no one will say plainly. I do not have proof of that. But I have the instinct of a woman who has sat across from both men now and knows the difference between mystery and danger. You are one of those things. He is the other. Something in his jaw changed, a small tightening, then a release, as if her answer had moved something inside him that he had not expected to be moved. One condition, he said. Name it. If at any point this arrangement stops protecting you, if you are frightened, if you need to leave, if circumstances change, you go. No guilt and no obligation. I will not come after you. You leave freely and cleanly, or the same way you came. No one had ever said that to her. Not her father, not her mother, not any person in her life who had a claim on her. The offer of an open door was so unexpected that she had to swallow against something that threatened to surface. Agreed, she said. He stood from the wall, tucking the contract inside his coat. Then let's go find the minister. St. Columba sat at the north end of Brar, behind a low stone wall with a gate that needed lifting to open. The church was small and old and smelled exactly as old stone churches smell in January, of cold air and candle wax and something that was either damp hymnals or time itself. It was hard to say which. James Black received them in the vestry with the calm of a man who has seen a great deal of the human condition and finds very little of it surprising. While he was close to 65, white-haired and thin, with the kind of direct, measuring eyes that belong to people who have spent decades separating what people say from what they mean. Matilda explained their purpose. She did not embellish. She set out the facts in the same plain manner she had used with Thomas, and she placed the contract on the minister's desk. James Black read it. He looked at Thomas. You are willing? I am, Thomas said. The minister looked between them for a measured beat. I will not interrogate your reasons. People have married for practical purposes for as long as marriage has existed, and the Lord has generally left that calculation to the parties involved. He folded his hands. I ask only this. Is there, on either side, any legal reason this marriage cannot stand? None on my side, Matilda said. Or Thomas was quiet for a half-second longer than she was. Then, none. James Black noted the slight pause without commenting on it and reached for his register. "I'll need 2 witnesses." Gabriella Henderson arrived, as though Brar itself had sent her. The innkeeper's wife was a solid, capable woman in her mid-40s, with warm brown eyes set in a face that had been shaped by both laughter and hard seasons. She had followed them from the square, not out of nosiness, she would later insist, but out of the practical concern of a woman who recognizes a precipice when she sees someone standing at the edge of one. She took one look at Matilda's traveling cloak and made a small, decisive sound. She disappeared into the church and returned with a cream wool shawl that she pinned at Matilda's shoulder with 3 neat stitches of a silver pin, it working quickly and without ceremony. "There," she said. "If you're going to do this, do it properly." Matilda looked at the shawl on her shoulder and felt, suddenly and without warning, the sting behind her eyes that she had been holding back since she walked out of Thornwick's front door in the dark. It was such a small kindness, such an entirely unlooked-for kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "Save it for after," Gabriella said, not unkindly. "Pay attention to the minister." James Black spoke the ceremony without flourish, each word clear and deliberate, in the way of a man who respects the weight of what he is saying too much to dress it up. Matilda listened. She held every word individually, like stones she was placing one by one to build a path forward. When it came to the ring, she had nothing. She had not thought about a ring. But Thomas reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a slim band of silver that he placed on her finger, with a steadiness that suggested he had thought about this, at least briefly, and had prepared. When the ring settled and he looked up, their eyes met for a moment that held slightly longer than it needed to. His face was composed, but the composure was working harder than usual, and she could see that. She looked at him and thought, "Whoever you really are, you are doing this carefully, and that means something." James Black said the words that made it legal. Gabriella signed the register. The second witness, a young deacon who had been tidying the hymnals in the rear of the church, signed below her. Outside, the snow had stopped. A pale winter light had pushed through the cloud and lay thinly over the churchyard. Matilda stood in it for a moment, breathing it in. She was married to a man she had known for less than 3 hours. She was, legally, unreachable. She breathed out slowly and let the relief move through her the way feeling moves back into a numb limb, tingling, almost painful, unmistakably alive. The cottage Ethan rented on the east edge of Brar was the size of the back parlour at Thornwick, and had the structural confidence of something that had survived long enough to be trustworthy. The roof held. The hearth drew. The walls were thick enough to keep the worst of the highland winter outside where it belonged. Ethan, she still thought of him as Thomas in the first weeks, until the name began to feel wrong on her tongue, had established the household rules before they reached the door. Note, he said them plainly and without apology. She would have the back room. He would sleep by the fire. There would be no obligation between them beyond what the contract specified. If she needed anything, she should ask. She had agreed. The arrangement held for exactly 3 days before she realized that the rules were mostly about protecting her from feeling indebted, and once she understood that, the rules became something else entirely, something she found herself grateful for, rather than confined by. He was up before her every morning. The fire was already burning when she came out of the back room. Water was already on. There was never any comment on this. He did not perform the kindness. He simply did it, the way a man does things when they have become habit, and moved on to the next task. She learned the cottage quickly. She had to. Carrying water from the well was the first skill, and it was harder than it looked. Not the carrying itself, but the calibration of it, the understanding of how much was enough for a day, and how the morning ice formed on the top of the pail and had to be cracked before drawing. She learned the fire next, under Thomas's patient, mostly silent instruction. Then the bread, which she got wrong twice before she got it right, and which he ate both times without comment, which she decided to count as encouragement. There was something in the rhythm of it that surprised her. The Thornwick she had grown up in was a house of managed appearances. Every surface kept up, every difficulty smoothed over before it could be seen. Here, difficulty was simply the texture of the day. The fire needed tending, or it went out. The water needed fetching, or there was none. The food needed cooking, or you went hungry. Every task was direct, and every result was immediate, and there was an honesty in that which she found, to her own surprise, deeply settling. She began to stop dreading the mornings. Between them, something built, not quickly, not loudly, but with the steady accumulation of shared days and small moments. He taught her to split wood with the grain rather than against it. She told him, one evening over the plain supper, she had managed better than expected, about her father, about who he had been before the fever, which was different from who she had been mourning, and the difference mattered. He listened to the whole of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment, but then he said, "He sounds like someone who would have found a different way out of this, if he had lived." She had not expected that. She had not expected him to understand it that precisely. "Yes," she said. They sat with that for a while, the fire between them, the cottage quiet and small, and, in its smallness, somehow sufficient. She noticed the nightmares on the 9th night. She heard him from the back room. Not loudly, just the sharp intake of breath and the sound of someone pulling back from something in the dark. It happened twice in the first 2 weeks. She did not mention it. He did not mention it. But after the second time, she began leaving a cup of water near where he slept, and she never explained why, and he never asked. She noticed the ring again on the 14th day, properly this time, or she had been mending a seam by the fire, and the light caught it when he moved his hand, and she saw the crest clearly for the first time. It was not decorative. It was a seal, old gold, pressed with a design too specific to be decorative, too well made to be sentimental. She looked up from the ring to his face. He had noticed her looking. "Not yet," he said quietly. "All right," she said, and went back to the seam. She did not push. She had a sense, growing clearer with every day, that whatever was underneath the surface of Thomas Campbell was something worth waiting for, something that would not be hurried, something that would only emerge in its own time, when trust had built enough of a foundation to hold the weight of it. She had not expected to feel this. She had come to Bra for a legal arrangement. She had contracted for protection, not for this slow warmth that was building between them in the ordinary work of ordinary days. She did not know what to call it yet, but she was beginning to stop looking away from it. Hannah Patterson arrived in Bra on the 14th day, which was 2 days earlier than Matilda had calculated, which meant someone had talked. She came in the least expensive hired carriage available, the one with the cracked leather seat and the horse that was built for endurance rather than speed, and she stepped out into the Bra Square wearing the lilac silk that had been pressed so many times it had begun to take on a faint translucence at the elbows. The bundle of papers under her arm was tied with string, the solicitor's letters, the creditor's accounts, perhaps the draft of the marriage agreement she had already been preparing with Brian Dixon's household. Her face was the face of a woman who had been rehearsing this confrontation for 2 weeks and was ready to deliver it. Matilda saw her from the cottage window and felt the specific dread of someone who has been expecting a storm and now sees it arrive on the horizon. Ethan was beside her in 3 steps, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. He had been in the middle of reading. She had noticed he read when he thought she wasn't watching, and always tucked the books away when she came near, which was a habit she was growing increasingly curious about. "Together," Matilda said, before he could ask. "I'm not doing this alone." He said nothing. He simply opened the door. They walked out into the square, side by side, and Matilda watched her mother register the approach of 2 people rather than 1, and watched Hannah's prepared speech rearrange itself slightly behind her eyes. Hannah's gaze moved to Ethan, the way a woman assesses a threat she has not accounted for, rapidly, comprehensively, and with the particular sharpening that comes from years of navigating a world where appearances told you almost everything important. What she saw was the coat, the scarf, the boots worn through at the heel, the face that said nothing about drawing rooms or dinner tables or the kind of connections that mattered in the world Hannah had spent her life trying to stay inside. She looked at her daughter with an expression that was part fury, part grief, and entirely unprepared. "You left your home," she said. Her voice held. "Barely. You left your family and your future. For this. For him." "I left a trap," Matilda said, and kept her voice even. "There is a difference." "This is not..." Hannah stopped, looked at the ring on Matilda's finger, looked at James Black's church at the end of the road. The working out of the sum happened across her face in real time. "You did not." 2 weeks ago. James Black performed the ceremony, or the register is signed and witnessed. Hannah looked at Ethan. The look she gave him was not a look anyone would choose to receive. It was the look of someone who sees an obstacle and is deciding how to remove it. "A beggar," she said. The word was not loud. It was precise and deliberate, a blade rather than a blunt instrument. "You have married my daughter to a beggar." Ethan stood still. Not from passivity, from the conscious decision of a man who has been in rooms where words were thrown like weapons before, and has learned that stillness is a better response than reaction. He let the word land and simply remained. "I married a man I chose," Matilda said. The heat in her voice had arrived, controlled but real. "Which is what you wouldn't permit me. Brian Dixon would have given you security. A house, a name with weight behind it. Brian Dixon frightened me," Matilda said plainly. "Not the idea of him, not the abstract possibility of him. Him, the actual man who sat across the tea table and looked at me like I was a number in a column. I will not be purchased. Not for this house, not for that debt, not for you. I am sorry for the difficulty. I am sorry for what Father's death has done to us both. But I will not solve it by marrying a man who has already buried 2 women." The square had gone quiet around them. Not many people, but enough. The cheese seller, 2 men by the cart, Gabriella in the doorway of the inn with her hands wrapped in her apron. Bra was a small village. Small villages notice everything. Hannah stood with her papers and her resolve and the visible remnants of a plan that was collapsing around her. Or for a moment she looked at her daughter with something raw and unguarded crossing her face. Not anger now, but a kind of exhausted, recognizing grief. She opened her mouth to speak, and then she looked at Ethan's hand. He raised his right hand to adjust his scarf. A simple gesture. Unremarkable, except for what it revealed. The cuff of his coat fell back with the movement, and the ring on his right hand caught the flat January light of the Bra Square and held it, a flash of old gold, a crest pressed into the surface with the weight and specificity of something that had been in one family for generations. A signet ring. Not the kind a man buys, the kind a man inherits. Hannah's eyes locked on it. Why, she had grown up in a world where these things were a language, where the cut of a coat and the make of a boot and the seal on a ring told you more about a man's position than any introduction. She knew what a signet ring looked like. She had watched men wear them all her life and had learned to read them the way some women read faces. Her lips parted. Nothing came out. She took a step forward, her papers shifting in her arm, her eyes fixed on the crest with an intensity that had swallowed everything else. The market noise was still there. The cold was still there. But she was not hearing or feeling any of it. "That crest," she said. Her voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur. "That is the Campbell of Argyle seal." The square was fully still now. Gabriella had come 3 steps out of the inn doorway, or the cheese seller was no longer pretending to arrange her wares. Even the horse at the hitching post had gone quiet, in the way horses go quiet when the atmosphere around them changes. Hannah looked at Ethan, not at his coat or his boots or the scarf, at his face. Really looked, possibly for the first time since she had stepped out of the carriage, with the kind of looking that strips away what it expects to see and works with what is actually there. The straight carriage, the controlled stillness, the way he had absorbed her attack without flinching, not from meekness, but from the particular composure of a man who has stood in rooms far more demanding than a village square, and knows that dignity is not diminished by staying quiet. "Who are you?" she said. Ethan looked at Matilda first. It was a brief look, a question and an apology in the same breath, a preparation and a reckoning. She met it without flinching. She did not know what was coming, but she was ready for it, and he could see that she was. And that was what finally settled the decision that had been building in him since the morning she had walked across the square with a contract and offered him, in her way, the same thing he had once had and lost, a door that opened outward instead of in. He looked back at Hannah. "Ethan Campbell," he said, quietly, completely. "Duke of Argyle." 3 words. They landed in the January air of Bra Square and began their slow, irreversible spread, from Hannah's face to Gabriella's in the doorway, to the cheese seller, to the men by the cart, or moving the way news moves in a small village, fast and total and impossible to call back. Matilda stood very still. She knew the name. Every family in the Highlands knew the name. The Duke of Argyle, one of the oldest titles in Scotland, held by the Campbell line through generations, connected to land and law, and the kind of old power that did not announce itself because it had never needed to. The man had vanished from public life approximately a year ago. There had been talk. There was always talk. People said grief. People said scandal. People said he had gone to the continent or to a sanitarium, or simply that he had walked into the Highlands one morning and not come back. No one had said he was in Bra. No one had said he was carrying boxes and sleeping on a pallet by someone else's fire. She looked at the man she had married 14 days ago, at the worn coat and the careful face, and the gold ring that had been wrong for his circumstances from the very first moment she had noticed it. He was looking back at her, still, waiting. She thought about what it took to do what he had done, to walk away from a title and a name and everything attached to both, and to keep walking until nobody knew who you were, and to stay gone for long enough that the keeping gone had felt like the only available truth. She knew something about running from a life that had been decided for her. She understood, in the specific way of a person who has made the same shape of decision, what it cost. She reached out and took his right hand, the one with the ring. She did not say anything. The gesture said it for her. Ethan's hand tightened around hers, and then from the far end of the village road, wheels and hoofbeats announced themselves, not hurrying, but coming with the deliberate pace of a man who arrives as a statement rather than a surprise. Brian Dixon's carriage turned into Brar. He stepped down from the carriage in his good Perthshire coat, his fair hair combed precisely flat, his polished boots finding the cobblestones with the assurance of a man who is accustomed to his feet landing exactly where he intends them to. He surveyed the square in 2 seconds. His eyes found Ethan and stopped. Something moved through Brian Dixon's face. Not surprise, because he had known something before he arrived. Not anger, because men like Brian kept anger locked in a drawer and only took it out when it was useful. It was the look of a chess player who has just confirmed which piece his opponent was holding. Calculating. Cold. The face of a man updating his strategy. He crossed the square at an unhurried walk. When he stopped, he looked at Ethan with the familiarity of two people who share a history neither of them discusses in rooms with other people. "Ethan Campbell," he said. I had begun to wonder. "Dixon," Ethan said. Brian's gaze moved to Matilda, to their joined hands, to the ring. His assessment was instantaneous and complete. He looked back at Ethan with a thin, practiced smile that held everything except warmth. "So, this is where you have been keeping yourself." He turned to Matilda with the manner of a man doing something gracious at some personal cost. "Miss Patterson, I had rather hoped we might come to an arrangement." "Lady Campbell," Ethan said. 2 words, flat and final. The correction fell on Brian Dixon like a door being closed in his face. The smile held. "Of course. Congratulations are in order." He let a small beat pass. "I do wonder, though, whether your new wife has been given the full picture. The inquiry, for instance. The questions that were raised about the late Duchess. The correspondence that has gone unanswered for the better part of a year." He said it pleasantly, conversationally, the way a man mentions weather. And the pleasantness of it was the most threatening thing about it, because pleasantness, in Brian Dixon's particular register, was always the precursor to something intended to destroy. Matilda felt Ethan's hand tighten fractionally around hers. He turned to her, and the turning was deliberate. Toward her, not away from her, which she noted with a clarity that cut through everything else. "My wife, Eleanor, died of fever 14 months ago," he said. His voice was level. Not performing levelness, actually level, because he had made peace with the grief of it, even if he hadn't made peace with what had been built on top of it. She was ill for 5 days. 3 physicians attended her. Their records exist. Her death was not caused by anything I did or failed to do. He looked at Brian Dixon then. What Dixon has spent the last year doing is raising questions he already knows the answers to. Because a man under investigation cannot contest a business dispute, as in there is a substantial dispute between us that he would very much prefer to resolve in his absence rather than mine. The square listened. Matilda looked at Brian Dixon and thought about the 2 women who had died. She thought about the way he had looked at her over tea, assessing, calculating, pricing. She thought about the families of both women and whether they had sat where she was sitting now, knowing something was wrong and being unable to name it quickly enough. She said, "You used the inquiry to keep him gone. While he was gone, you moved against his interests. You needed him absent, so you made sure the questions kept coming." Brian looked at her with an expression that was not quite respect, but was its architectural neighbor, the recognition of an unexpected opponent. "What you are making an allegation without evidence," he said. "I am describing a pattern," she said, "and I am telling you clearly what the shape of this moment is. Ethan Campbell is standing in this village square in front of witnesses who know his name. He is married on record in the register of this church. He is no longer absent. He is no longer a man who can be managed by keeping questions open. Every legal action you have been building in his silence will now have to operate in his presence, with a wife beside him, who has no difficulty making what she knows very widely understood." She paused. "Let it settle." "I would think carefully before your next move," she said. Brian Dixon was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not defeat, but is the pause before recalculation. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Matilda. He looked at Hannah, who was standing to one side with her bundle of papers and an expression that had moved, somewhere in the last 5 minutes, from furious to shaken. Then Brian turned and walked back to his carriage. No farewell. No parting volley. Just the retreat of a man who has recognized that the terrain has shifted and is choosing to fight on different ground, on a different day. The carriage door closed. The wheels moved. The sound of them faded down the Bra Road and then was gone. The square breathed. Gabriella let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a held breath releasing. The cheese seller began conspicuously rearranging her stock. The two men near the cart started talking to each other again, quietly and with the particular energy of people who are pretending they have not just witnessed something they will discuss for the rest of the month. Matilda stood in the middle of all of it with her hand still in Ethan's, and felt the wave of it. Everything she had been carrying for 14 days, for months before that. The whole long, careful weight of the plan and the fear underneath it, and the hope she hadn't let herself name, felt it move through her and begin, very slowly, to set down. She looked at Ethan. He was looking at her. "You knew about Brian," she said. Not an accusation. A question she already knew the beginning of the answer to. "Not until the morning I agreed to marry you," he said. "You told me about a wealthy widower with 2 dead wives. I knew immediately which man you meant. And I knew, the moment you described him, that walking away from your proposal would have been leaving you to something I could not allow." She absorbed that. Then she turned to her mother. Now Hannah Patterson was standing 6 feet away with the bundle of papers pressed against her chest, and the expression of a woman who has arrived somewhere she did not intend to go, and is not yet sure how to proceed from it. The rehearsed speech was gone. The prepared fury was gone. What was left was something older and quieter and far more human. She looked at her daughter. Matilda took a step toward her. "Just one," Hannah said, very quietly. "I did not know he was that kind of man." "I know," Matilda said. "I believe you." "I was frightened," Hannah said. "Of the debt, of losing the house, of what happened to women who had nothing left. I was so frightened that I stopped looking at what I was asking you to walk into." Matilda looked at her mother, at the worn lilac, the 2 bright eyes, the hands that were not quite steady on the papers. A woman who had been managing fear alone for 18 months and had made out of that fear a decision she could not undo. She crossed the remaining distance and put her arms around her mother. Hannah stood rigid for 1 second. Then she held on, tightly, the way people hold on when they have been braced against something for a very long time, and the bracing has finally ended. That evening, the cottage held all 3 of them for supper. Matilda, Ethan, and Gabriella Henderson, who appeared at the door with a pot of mutton broth and the manner of someone who has decided that a situation requires feeding and is not going to be argued with about it. Hannah had been settled at the inn. There had been no agreement yet about what came next, but the fury was gone from the air between mother and daughter, and what was left was something more workable. After Gabriella left, Matilda and Ethan sat at the small table with the fire low and the night outside pressing at the shutters, and he told her. He told her about Eleanor, about the fever that had taken her quickly and without mercy, and about the aftermath, the way grief and business and a man like Brian Dixon could be combined in the hands of someone skilled enough into something that looked like scandal from the outside. The inquiry had been built on rumor rather than evidence, but rumor was enough to make a man untouchable while it was live, and Ethan had made the decision, wrong he understood now, but not without logic, that removing himself from the picture would force the inquiry to collapse without him to sustain it. It had not collapsed. It had simply continued to serve its purpose, which was to keep him gone. "You could have stayed," Matilda said, "fought it directly." "I could have," he said. "I couldn't see that then." Grief does something to a person's ability to see options clearly. I was running, and I told myself the running was tactical, and there was enough truth in that to keep me believing it for longer than I should have. She looked at him across the table, at the man who had been hiding in plain sight in a village 12 miles from her own collapsing home, both of them running from different versions of the same trap, both of them choosing hardship over surrender. "You are not running anymore?" she said. "No," he said. "I'm not." A quiet settled between them. The good kind, not the careful, managed quiet of two people keeping a careful distance, but the easy quiet of two people who have, in their own ways, arrived at the same place at the same time, and are no longer in a hurry. Ethan looked at her across the table and said, plainly and without preamble, "I did not expect you." "I didn't expect you either," she said. He stopped, started again, more carefully. "I agreed to your contract for the reasons I gave you. They were real reasons, but there were other reasons too, which I did not explain because I was not ready to, and I think you deserve to know them now." She waited. "You walked across a square in a snowstorm with a marriage contract under your arm," he said, "and everything about the way you did it told me that you were not doing it out of weakness or out of desperation. You were doing it out of an absolute refusal to be owned. And I recognized that, more than I expected to." She looked at him for a long moment. The firelight moved between them. "I am not very easy to be around," she said. "I have been told I am too direct, too stubborn, too certain of my own opinions." "I am aware of that," he said, and the slight movement at the corner of his mouth was the closest thing to a full smile she had seen on him. And it was enough. She leaned across the table. She placed her hand over his. The right hand, the one with the ring. He turned his hand over and held hers. The fire burned. Outside, the snow came back, the serious kind, settling over Bra with the weight of a highland winter that was nowhere near finished. Inside the cottage, the cold was held at bay by walls thick enough for purpose, and warmth built from the honest work of two people who had chosen this and each other, without guarantee. Matilda felt the shape of it, this thing she had not been looking for when she wrote a contract at a Thornwick writing desk at midnight. This thing that had arrived sideways, through practicality and crisis, and the kind of small daily proximity that teaches you more about a person than any number of formal introductions. She felt it the way you feel something that is genuinely yours, not given, not arranged, not purchased, built. The weeks after Bra were not peaceful. Nothing real ever is. Ethan returned to Argyle, not hiding this time, but walking through the front gate with Matilda beside him and a solicitor at his back, and a set of documents that made Brian Dixon's legal architecture look exactly like what it was. A structure built on a man's absence, designed to hold only as long as he stayed gone. Or the moment Ethan was present, publicly and demonstrably, the whole construction began to fall. The inquiry was reviewed by a panel that could find no supporting evidence for its central claims. The business dispute moved into proper legal channels where it could be argued on its actual merits, which did not favor Brian Dixon's position. Brian himself retreated to Perthshire and took his carefully polished manners with him. He did not escalate again. Men like Brian Dixon chose battles they could win in private. He had lost the privacy. Hannah Patterson came to Argyll in the spring, without the papers this time, and without the prepared speech. She sat with Matilda in the garden that had been opened up for the first time in 2 seasons, and she said, "I thought I was saving you from poverty." "I know," Matilda said, "but I did not see what I was saving you into." The Thornwick debt was not solved by the marriage. Matilda would not have allowed that, and Ethan did not offer it. What happened was slower and more honest. A renegotiation, a careful sale, a cousin who turned out to be more decent than feared, and Hannah herself, freed finally from the desperate management of a losing position, proving considerably more resourceful when she was not working from terror. Things held. Not perfectly, not always comfortably, but they held. As for Ethan Campbell, the Duke of Argyll, who had spent a year in a borrowed coat in a village 12 miles from the woman he would marry, he stopped hiding. He walked back into his name and his responsibilities, and the long, complicated work of managing a title and a legacy, and found that none of it frightened him the way it had before Bra. He had needed to be nobody for a while. He had needed to find out what he was when the title was removed, and only the man remained. He had found out. On evenings when the fire was low at Argyll and the house was settled around them, Ethan looked across at Matilda, reading or writing, or doing something entirely practical with the focused attention she brought to everything she cared about, and held, somewhere in the steady center of himself, the specific kind of gratitude that comes to people who know exactly how close they came to missing the thing they most needed. Matilda Patterson had walked across a square in a snowstorm with a contract and the absolute refusal to be purchased. She had gotten, in the end, exactly what she had asked for. Not what she had contracted for. What she had actually asked for, underneath the contract, below the careful legal language and the strict terms and the practical calculation. A life that was truly hers. Before we step out of this story, I want to ask you something personal. If you were Matilda, with no safe road, no guaranteed outcome, and everything familiar on one side and freedom on the other, would you have crossed that square? If your answer is yes, type free in the comments. If your answer is no, type safe. I read every single comment, and your answers shape the stories I bring you next. If you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. 1 second, and it means everything. Hit that like button so this story finds the people who need it most. And tell me what country you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Lady Matilda Patterson thought she was marrying a beggar to end a nightmare. She was choosing, without knowing it, a life in which nobody would ever buy her again. And Ethan Campbell, the Duke of Argyll, who had dressed himself in hardship and disappeared because he could not see any other way to survive, stopped running the morning someone walked toward him in a snowstorm and looked at him like a person worth standing beside. Not a title, not a liability, not a problem to be solved or an asset to be used. A person. There is something quietly powerful about choosing truth when the easier thing was to keep pretending. Matilda chose it with a contract and a cold morning and 12 miles between herself and a trap. Ethan chose it in a village square, at letting his name come back into the light, because the woman beside him had already made clear she could hold the weight of it. Sometimes the bravest thing is not the dramatic gesture. It is the small, ordinary decision to stop hiding, and to trust that the person standing closest to you can handle the real version of who you are. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. Your time is not something I take lightly, and I hope this one found you somewhere real. Thank you, Thai.